Chapter 21. There were many men and women in Umuofia who did not feel as strongly as Okonkwo about the new dispensation. The white man had indeed brought a lunatic religion, but he had also built a trading store, and for the first time palm oil and kernel became things of great price, and much money flowed into Umuofia. And even in the matter of religion, there was a growing feeling that there might be something in it after all, something vaguely akin to the method in the overwhelming madness. This growing feeling was due to Mr. Brown, the white missionary, who was very firm in restraining his flock from provoking the wrath of the clan. One member in particular was very difficult to restrain. His name was Enoch, and his father was the priest of the snake cult. The story went around that Enoch had killed and eaten the sacred python, and that his father had cursed him. Mr. Brown preached against such excess of zeal. Everything was possible, he told his energetic flock, but everything was not expedient. And so Mr. Brown came to be respected even by the clan because he trod softly on its faith. He made friends with some of the great men of the clan, and on one of his frequent visits to the neighboring village, he had been presented with a carved elephant tusk, which was a sign of dignity and rank. One of the great men in that village was called Akuna, and he had given one of his sons to be taught the white man's knowledge at Mr. Brown's school. Whenever Mr. Brown went to the village, he spent long hours with Akuna in his obi, talking through an interpreter about religion. Neither of them succeeded in converting the other, but they learned much about their different beliefs. You say that there is one supreme God who made heaven and earth, said Akuna on one of Mr. Brown's visits. We also believe in him and call him Chukwu. He made all the world and the other gods. There are no other gods, said Mr. Brown. Chukwu is the only God, and all others are false. You carve a piece of wood like that one. He pointed to the rafters from which Akuna's carved Inkela hung. And you call it a god, but it is still a piece of wood. Yes, said Akuna. It is indeed still a piece of wood. The tree from which it came was made by Chukwu, as indeed all minion gods were. He made them for his messengers, so that we could approach him through them. It is like yourself. You are the head of your church. No, protested Mr. Brown. The head of my church is God himself. I know, said Akuna, but there must be a head in this world among men. Somebody like yourself must be head here. The head of my church is, in that sense, is in England. That is exactly what I am saying. The head of your church is in your country. He has sent you here as his messenger, and you have also been appointed your own messengers and servants. Or let me take another example, the district commissioner. He is sent by your king. They have a queen, said the interpreter on his own account. Your queen sends her messenger, the district commissioner. He finds that he cannot do the work alone, and so he appoints Kotma to help you. It is the same with God, or Chukwu. He appoints the smaller gods to help him because his work is too great for one person. You should not think of him as a person, said Mr. Brown. It is because you do so that you imagine he must need helpers. And the worst thing about it is that you give all the worship to the false gods you have created. That is not so. We make sacrifices to the little gods, but when they fail and there is no one else to turn to, we go to Chukwu. It is right to do so. We approach a great man through his servants. But when his servants fail to help us, then we go to the last source of hope. We appeal to pay greater attention to the little gods. But that is not so. We worry them more because we are afraid to worry the master. Our fathers knew that Chukwu was the overlord, and that is why many of them gave their children the name Chukwu, Chukwuku. Chukwu is supreme. You said one interesting thing, said Mr. Brown. You said you are afraid of Chukwu. In my religion, Chukwu is a loving father and need not be afraid, but those who do his will. But we must fear him when we are not doing his will, and who is to tell his will? It is too great to know. In this way, Mr. Brown learned a great deal about religion of the clan, and he came to the conclusion that a frontal attack on it would not succeed, and so he built a school and a little hospital in Umuofia. He went from family to family begging people to send their children to his school, but at first they only sent their slaves, sometimes their lazy children. Mr. Brown begged and argued and prophesied. He said that the leaders of the land in the future would be men and women who had learned to read and write. If Umuofia failed to send her children to the school, strangers would come from other places to rule them. They could already see this happening in native court, where the DC was surrounded by strangers who spoke his tongue. Most of these strangers came from the distant land of Umuro, or the bank of the great river, where the white men first went. In the end, Mr. Brown's arguments began to have an effect. More people came to learn in his school, and he encountered them with gifts of singlets and towels. They were not all young, these people who came to learn. Some of them were 30 years old or more. They worked on their farms in the morning and went to school in the afternoon, and it was not long before the people began to say that the white man's medicine was quick in working. Mr. Brown's school produced quick results. A few months in it were enough to make one a court messenger or even a court clerk. Those who stayed longer became teachers, and from Umuofia, laborers were teachers, and from Umuofia, laborers went forth into the Lord's vineyard. New churches were established in the surrounding villages, and a few schools with them. From the very beginning, religion and education went hand in hand. Mr. Brown's mission grew from strength to strength, and because of its link with the new administration, it earned a new social prestige. But Mr. Brown himself was breaking down in health. At first he ignored the warning signs, but in the end he had to leave his flock, sad and broken. It was in the first rainy season after Okonkwo's return to Umuofia that Mr. Brown left for home. As soon as he had learned of Okonkwo's return 5 months earlier, the missionary had immediately paid him a visit. He had just sent Okonkwo's son, Nuowi, who was now called Isaac, to the new training school for teachers in Umuro, and he had hoped that Okonkwo would be happy to hear of it. But Okonkwo had driven him away with a threat that if he came into his compound again, he would be carried out of it. Okonkwo's return to his native land was not as memorable as he had wished. It was true his 2 beautiful daughters aroused great interest among suitors, and marriage negotiations were soon in progress. But beyond that, Umuofia did not appear to have taken any special notice of the warrior's return. The clan had undergone such profound change during this exile that it was barely recognizable. The new religion and government and the trading stores were very much in the people's eyes and minds. There were still many who saw these new institutions as evil, but even they talked and thought about little else, and certainly not about Okonkwo's return. And it was the wrong year, too. If Okonkwo had immediately initiated his 2 sons into the Ozo Society as he had planned, he would have caused a stir. But the initiation rite was performed once in 3 years in Umuofia, and he had to wait for nearly 2 years for the next round of ceremonies. Okonkwo was deeply grieved, and it was not just a personal grief. He mourned for the clan, which he saw breaking up and falling apart, and he mourned for the warlike men of Umuofia, who had so unaccountably become soft like women.